Hello once again. We continue our discussion on personal requirements, which is chapter 4 in your book. In the first set of slides of chapter 4, we considered the personal requirements for parking spaces, where to locate the parking spaces, what should be the size, and what are the potential or alternative layout types. In this set of slides, we continue with personal requirements, again with chapter 4. Let's remember once again what were the basic personal requirements. The parking spaces for employees, storage for employees' belongings, restrooms, food services, health services, for barrier-free compliance for handicapped personnel or employees, and we will also talk about office facilities planning. So we already considered the employee parkings. Let's continue with the remaining part of these requirements. So we will first consider the the storage space requirements for employees' personal belongings. Depending on the company or the industry, some employees need to change their clothes and wear certain type of uniforms or special equipment. For example, if the work environment is too hot or too cold or has some toxic material, the personnel need to change their clothes, or maybe even they need to take a shower before and after work. So depending on this situation, the storage area or the storage requirements may change. If the employees do not require to change their clothes, then in fact, the company need not to allocate a larger space for these employees. Only a simple rack should be satisfactory. But usually, even if the employees do not change their clothes, usually some space are allocated for the employees. But especially for the ones who require to change their clothes, then certain spaces with lockers should be assigned or allocated to employees. This storage area usually provided, or it is better to provide this area between the employee entrance and the work area, so that whenever the employees come to work, they can change their clothes, put their personal belongings, their lunch or other belongings, and at the end of the day, again when they are leaving the workspace, they can take their belongings and leave the workspace. Usually these locker rooms are located alongside the outside walls, adjacent to the outside walls, which satisfies the ventilation and which satisfies the workers more. This is an example of how to locate these locker rooms, or if necessary, the changing rooms for the personnel. So you see, this is the entrance of the plant, and nearby the entrance, a special room is arranged for men and women employees for their changing their clothes, and a shower area and toilets are also allocated. So this is janitor's room, and this is a room for nursing station. Okay, so whenever employees enter into the working area, they can easily change their clothes. If it is necessary, they can take a shower, and then they can continue for their workplace. Another requirement that should be satisfied for the employees while designing the facilities is the restrooms. For each one of these, in fact, there are some rules or there are some standards. You can consult your book. Please have a look at chapter 4 in your book. You will see lots of tables, and in each one of these tables they will provide you the number of, for example, restrooms that you need to design or you need to allocate for each number of employees or each number of floor space area and etc. And basically you can use that information or those tables while designing the facility. And these tables are usually constructed with previous experience, or if there are such rules and regulations of the government or the local administration or of the company, then these tables are, or these numbers should be designed according to those regulations. So as a rule or as a standard, a restroom should be within 200 feet of every permanent workstation. Okay, within 200 feet of every permanent workstation. In order to satisfy the employees, decentralized restrooms are often better than a large central restrooms. The access to restrooms must be available for handicapped employees. So you need to take care, you need to satisfy the spatial area and number of restrooms for the handicapped employees. So in some companies, the restrooms are designed for single occupancy. But if it is not the case, then separate restrooms should be provided for each sex. For each toilet, again as a standard, 15 square feet of area should be allowed. So while designing the facility, you need to allocate this much floor area for each toilet. And for each urinal, again, the standard is to allocate 6 square feet of area. Okay. And these toilets and urinals must be designed to accommodate wheelchairs. This is an example of such tables that I mentioned in the previous slide. So depending on which industry you are, you can find such numbers. For example, if the company is in business, mercantile, industrial, other than foundry and storage, then if depending on the number of employees, for example, if the number of employees is in between 1 and 15, then you need to have at least one water closet. If the number of employees is between 16 and 35, then you need to have 2. So for each number of employees, you can find the number of water closets that you need to have in your design. Okay. Similarly, the number of lavatories that you need to have, depending on the number of employees, you can find in such tables. Okay. If you are considering a company or designing a plant for industrial, foundries, and storage, then the numbers may be changed, may be different than the previous one. So for each one of these, you can find the necessary number of water closets, lavatories, and etc. With such tables. This is another example of such a table. Again, depending whether you have a service or a manufacturing facility, depending on the organization type, the number of showers, lavatories, water closets, water fountains, and others, depending on the number of employees, are given in this table as well. For example, if you are designing a restaurant, then for every 200 customers, you need to have one lavatory. For every 75 customers, you need to have one water closet. This is an example design for a restroom. You see there are 1, 2, 3, 4 water closets. So each one of them, a certain space is allocated. This is a water closet for the handicapped person. These are the lavatories and these are the urinals. And the design, the separation distance between each one of them, and the space allocated to each one of them, and also the space allocated for the entrance of the restroom is designed carefully. So you initially make a rough cut design, then in the final design you need to have all the details. Another requirement to be satisfied for the employees is the food services. So each employee spends approximately 8 hours, sometimes more than 8 hours in the facility. So they need to have at least one meal during this working time. And there are again certain standards and rules regulating the satisfaction of this need. For example, consumption of food is not allowed in areas where toxic substances exist. Okay? So the company should not allow the consumption of food if there are some toxic substances. The design of the food service, the layout of the facility and the size of the facility depends on the number of employees. So the food service facilities should be planned according to the number of employees working in the company. And also the kitchen facilities, if there are kitchen facilities, then the planning should be done by considering the number of meals to be served. Okay, so if, for example, during the lunch time, if all the employees are served at the same time, then depending on this, the food facilities and the kitchen facilities should be designed. But in some companies, the lunch breaks are made in shifts. Not all employees eat at the same time, but they start eating at different time periods. Then depending on this, you can reduce the size of the cafeteria, size of the food facilities, because at a certain time, the peak number of employees taking their lunch would be less. There are alternative ways of satisfying the food services. For example, a food service can be satisfied by dining away from the facility. You do not have any food facility, any cafeteria inside your plant, so the employees go outside and eat in the outside facilities. You can satisfy the food services by vending machines. You do not have people working to prepare the food and serve the food, but the employees get their meals from the vending machines. For example, if the number of employees is within a certain number, then you can use serving lines without a kitchen. Just get the meals from outside companies, food companies, and you just serve the meal in a serving line. Or you can have a full kitchen where you prepare all the food inside the facility. Okay, so in addition to these, the facility should satisfy or should provide drinking fountains for the employees within 200 feet of any location where employees are regularly engaged in work. Then you need to have drinking fountains. And also, other than the meal time, the lunch time, according to rules and regulations of the country and of the company, you need to give some break times for the employees. And if the cafeteria, for example, is more than 400 feet from the employees, then the company should design some break areas for the employees. We said that the food service requirements can be satisfied in various ways, and one of them is to dine away from the facility, and this may be the easier one for the company because they do not need to allocate any space for these facilities. But it has also some disadvantages. For example, if the employees need to go outside for the lunch, the meal breaks must be longer. They need to travel to outside of the facility, have their lunch or meal, and return back. So you need to have allowances for this travel time. Whenever the employees are outside your facility, you lose your supervision. Okay? What does it mean? Some employees may not return to work after the break and you may not notice it, or the workers may return late and again either you may not notice it, the company may not notice it, or they cannot prevent it. And also if the company, if the employees leave the plant, leave the facility for to have their meals, the concentration of the employees may be lost because they go outside, they see the outside, maybe nice weather, and etc. They do not return back and work after the meal. Okay? And also the food facilities nearby the company, nearby the plant, may not be sufficient to handle employee meal breaks conveniently. So your employees' satisfaction will be reduced. On the other hand, if the company, if the facility will satisfy food services inside the facility, within the facility, then there are a number of guidelines that they need to take. So the food services should be located within 1,000 feet of all permanent employee stations. What does it mean? If an employee is required to travel more than 1,000 feet, then you need to design decentralized food services. You do not ask each employee to come to a certain place, a single cafeteria to take their lunch, but you have 2 or 3 decentralized food services. The food services should be located to allow delivery of food and trash pickup. Also, in order to make your employees satisfied more during their lunch time, the food service should be located at a place to allow your employees to view the outside while eating. You know, the workers usually work, for example, in manufacturing companies, they work in an environment maybe which is noisy, all machines around, and you do not see outside. There are no windows or very smaller windows, so you are closed in an area, and in order to make them comfortable, feel happy, and increase their motivation during this lunchtime, if they see outside and eat their meals by viewing outside, they will be happy. Also, the food service should be located in a place with adequate ventilation, without any odors, and exhaust do not interfere with other activities within the facility. As I said, if it's a manufacturing facility, the let's say noise of the machines, the odors, the exhaust of the burning material, and etc., if they are coming to the cafeteria, then the employees will be dissatisfied. As I said, in some companies, all employees take their meal breaks at the same time, but in some others, they can take their breaks or lunch breaks at different time shifts. So if a time shift of 30 minutes is used in a company, usually 1/3 of this time, okay, if it is 30 minutes, then 1/3 of this is 20 minutes, 10 minutes, sorry. 10 minutes of this 30 minutes will be for preparing for the lunch, getting their meals, finding a place to sit and to sit. And the remaining 20 minutes will be the eating time on the tables. Okay, so the tables will be occupied for 20 minutes. So if you are using a 30-minute lunch break, then you can arrange your shift times in every 20 minutes so that the first shift start at 11:30, so they start taking or collecting their meals, and by 11:40 all these employees will sit down. So the chairs and tables will be occupied from 11:40 to 12. Then you can start the next shift for the lunch at 11:50 so that these employees collect their lunch in 10 minutes, and at 12 they start sitting on the tables. So at 12 the previous shift goes to work and the tables are empty so that the new shift can start using the tables again. And the next shift, again after 20 minutes, you can arrange the next shift so that they start at 12:10 and they start using the tables at 12:20 so that the previous shift is already finished their meal and as such. Okay, so in a 30-minute lunch break, you can make the arrangement in this way. If the lunch break time was 45 minutes, not 30 but 45, in this case, again, 1/3 of this, which means 15 minutes, will be for collecting the meals, and the remaining 30 minutes will be sitting on the tables and having the lunch. So in this case, you can arrange your shifts to start in every 30 minutes. So if the first shift starts at 11:30, then the next shift starts at 12. The next shift starts at 1 p.m. and the next shift starts at 1:30. Okay, this is the case if a 45-minute break is used. Basically, we allocate 1/3 of this time for collecting the lunch and 2/3 of the time, the remaining time, for sitting and having the lunch. This is an example layout for a serving line, which includes also the preparation area, but this serving line is for sandwiches and burgers, that kind of eating. Okay, so this part here is the preparation area. You have, for example, chicken fryer, the freezer, fry station, and etc. All the necessary kitchen equipment are at the back-hand side. The employee entrance is here, and it's a walk-through serving line. So each employee enters through here. There are trays here, and they take their salads or sandwiches, burgers, and etc. through this line. And then there's this cashier here, and they go, for example, to the tables or chairs to sit down. Another alternative to satisfy the food services for the employees is the vending machines, and maybe the easiest alternative and the most flexible alternative is the vending machines. This is an example design of an institutional vending area for satisfying food services. As you can see, there can be hot and cold beverages that you can take in using these vending machines. The input and output area, the counters, microwave oven, all vending machines are designed. Even wheelchair counter is designed in this is planned in this design. Similar to the other personal requirements, in food services there are also some standards and some rules, and you can find some tables if you consult your book. Okay. So for example, depending on the type of food facility, the square foot area should be allocated for each person is given in this table. So for a commercial alternative, for each person you need to have 16 to 18 square feet of area. Okay? For industrial, you need 12 to 15 per person, and this in fact depends on what kind of tables and chairs you are using. Again, if you look at your book, you can find some certain standards, even if you are using depending on if you are using square tables or rectangular tables or round tables. So each one of them have their standard area requirements, and also depending on whether the employees have their trays on the table with them or without trays, they are placing their foods on the tables, the table requirements, table size requirements will be different, and depending on the size of the tables, the total area requirement will also be different. Again, the next table here is the area requirement for full kitchens. If you are need to have, or if you are planning to have a full-size kitchen to satisfy food services, then for each number of meals served, the total area requirements for full-size kitchens are given in this table. Again, when you are making your design, you can consult to such tables. Another personal requirement that must be considered during the design of a facility is the health services, and it is very difficult to make this design or make a decision on health services, depending on what type of company, what type of plant you are designing. The requirements may be very different. Some facilities may only have a first aid kit, but on the other hand, some facilities, especially if you are dealing with dangerous material, toxic material, and etc., depending on the industry, some plants or facilities may have a small-sized hospitals. So it is important to check the local building codes, the rules and regulations for establishing the health services for the facilities. We can say that at least for each facility, we must have a nurse, a small first aid room, which should be the size around 100 square feet, which contains a first aid kit, a bed and 2 chairs, a 75 square feet waiting room, and if you are going to employ some additional nurses, for each additional nurse, 250 square feet should be added to the aid room and 25 square feet to the waiting room. This is an example design for a health service. So if you see in this design, there is examination room, water closets, the rest area, and for office waiting areas. All are designed in this health service. Depending on, again, the requirements of the company and the industry and maybe the local or the governmental rules, you need to have, for example, physicians, and the physician can work for part-time or full-time. And if you are going to have a physician working for part-time, you need to allocate at least 150 square feet for the physician. And if the physician works for full-time, then it's better to talk with the physician to ask for the space requirement and to understand which kind of services will be provided there, so that you can decide on the size of the facility. Next consideration for personal requirements is the barrier-free compliance. So the requirements of the disabled persons. According to ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, the facilities planner must ensure that disabled persons shall have the same right as the able-bodied to the full and free facilities that serve the public. So it means that the disabled person should use the facilities, each aspect of the facility, as the able-bodied persons. So if there are some physical conditions that avoid this for disabled person, then they are called barriers. For example, a door which is not wide enough so that a wheelchair cannot pass through this door is a barrier for a disabled person. And the designer should satisfy or should design the facility so that there are no such physical barriers. Every disabled person should be able to use the facility as the able-bodied employers. So in this figure you can see the dimensions of a wheelchair. The dimensions of the wheelchair, the reaching position of a disabled person sitting on a wheelchair, and the average turning diameter of a wheelchair. Now, with these diameters in hand, in the next slide, we will see the reaching places or reaching dimensions for an able-bodied person. And in order to make your design, you can make your design so that the disabled person and the able person can reach or use the facility without any barriers. So these reaching positions or dimensions have their intersections. So use those intersecting dimensions while making the designs. As I said, these are the reach requirements for an able-bodied person, standing or sitting, and etc. So when you compare this figure with the previous one for the disabled employee working or sitting on a wheelchair, then the design of the work environment of the facility can be done accordingly so that both of these employees can use the facility freely. The final consideration for personal requirements that we will consider in this chapter is the office facilities planning. So these are some examples of office facilities. The starting point for planning office facilities is the collection of data concerning the objectives of the facilities and the activities to be performed to accomplish these objectives. The data are collected to determine departmental interrelationships and departmental area requirements. These are also some other office facilities design examples. While designing offices, we may have different approaches. For example, one approach can be to design open offices. An open office is one in which the office area is free from temporary or permanent partition walls. There are no walls, the space is open, and no floor-to-ceiling walls exist. So the previous example designs were examples of open offices. Another approach for design can be the closed offices. The closed office structure is a structure where floor-to-ceiling temporary or permanent partition walls break up the office facility into smaller rooms. Open offices and closed offices have their advantages and disadvantages. So let's see what are the advantages and main criticisms on open offices. The major benefits of open offices can be listed as improved communications, improved supervision. So since the offices are open, you can see every employee and you can see what they are doing. Better access to common files and equipment, because the files and equipments are at a common place and every employee has the right to reach these files and equipment. Greater ease of illumination, since there are no walls, so illuminating, heating, cooling and ventilating these open offices are easier. Lower maintenance costs, because there is a certain single room. In fact, there are no different rooms, so you do not need to have different windows, different doors, different air conditioners, different lighting equipment for each one of them, but they are all common. And due to the space flexibility, the utilization of the space increases and there are reduced space utilizations for open offices. But of course, these are the benefits side. On the other hand, there are some disadvantages of open offices. Main objections or criticisms on open offices is the lack of privacy. So during the whole time, working time, you are in front of other people. You do not have a private space. Also, the open offices sometimes shows the lack of status recognition. The higher level, higher ranked employees usually have their private rooms, but lower level staff work in open offices, and this may seem as a status recognition. Also in open offices, it's difficult to control the noise level. Whenever there is a visitor, whenever there is a meeting, whenever two employees talk to each other, the others also need to listen to this and they may be interrupted. So also, if there are some activities in one side of the open office, then the employees on the other side of the office are also affected from this noise and activity, so they are interrupted. So these are the main objectives or criticisms on office facilities, open offices. In designing the office facilities, another aspect to be considered is the area requirements. Of course, this depends on the company, the requirements. It is not only the requirements, also you need to think about the design, the aesthetics parts and etc. But still, you can find some standard tables in the books. If you consult your book, for example, these are some guidelines to design different types of offices. So if, for example, this is a president's office, then the area requirement is 250 to up to 400 feet square. For a vice president's office, it is 150 to 250 feet square. So for executive offices and etc., you can find all different types of offices and their requirements in such tables. So besides considering different approaches for designing offices, whether open offices or closed offices, and also besides the area requirements for different types of office rooms, you should also consider ergonomic factors while designing the offices. As an example, if you are designing an office where a computer is used, then the lighting, the window should be perpendicular with the surface of the monitor, so in order to minimize the eye fatigue. So these kind of ergonomical factors must also be considered in your designs. So this is our final topic for this chapter. Please go ahead and read your book, Chapter 4 in Personal Requirements. You will find many more details and many tables providing necessary data or some standards on designing personal requirements. This is the end of Chapter 4.